Yeah, so welcome to the Science Basement's inaugural journal club. We're very happy that you guys can make it and really looking forward to the discussion for the article today. So just before we start talking about today's articles, I'd like to note that we have 3 Science Basement journal clubs coming up in this fall. It's actually fall 2020 and not springtime. We haven't scheduled those ones yet. The first of which is today, on the 10th of November, we have a paper regarding narrative and storytelling in science communication. And then on the 8th of December, talking about an article discussing communicating uncertainty. So look forward to those. You can find more information on our website under the SciComm Journal Club, where it's where the papers and the links are. Great. So the first paper is this research note from Eric Jensen and Alexander Gerber from the UK and Germany called Evidence-Based Science Communication. And this one was the shorter paper. And what we really wanted to discuss was we pulled this one because it sounded really interesting, because it makes a parallel between something that's really popular in medical research and medical practice called evidence-based medicine, which became a thing sort of in the 1990s and is very popular now. So they made a lot of parallels between evidence-based medicine and evidence-based science communication, and how something similar is really needed for the field of science communication. So they define evidence-based science communication as this conscientious, explicit, and judicious use of current best evidence in making decisions about what you want to do with science communication. And this means, like, realistically, not just sort of as science communication practitioners doing what we think is the best, but actually combining the best available evidence from the systematic research with our professional expertise and skills. So they make a big distinction in this paper between people who are science communication practitioners, actually doing science communication, usually researchers in other fields, and science communication researchers who are actually like on the social sciences research side, looking at the research of science communication. And a key point about the evidence-based science communication, again, paralleling this use of evidence-based medicine, is that you have to really be ready to invalidate these previously accepted practices and replace them with ones that are actually more effective, more accurate, and more powerful. And that can oftentimes really go counter to like established practices and what we think works by actually looking at the data. That being said, what counts as effective really depends on the context that you're in. So something that can work in one context, local or cultural context, may not work in another institution or country or region. Yeah. So very briefly, there's a lot of discussion in this paper talking about why people who are practicing science communication are very bad at discussing with people who are researchers in science communication. The most ironic of which, there isn't good science communication. There isn't good science communication about science communication. So they have a whole list and big part of the paper discussing how you can improve this communication between these the theory and the practice side. But since I think most of the people attending today are researchers interested in like practicing science communication, I'll skip that one and go straight to their list of what makes up evidence-based science communication. So they have these 12 different lists, a couple of which I'm not going to go through all of them. You can read more about them in the paper, but the ones that I wanted to highlight are the ones in bold here. So number 1 is evidence-based practice. So this is particularly relevant for those of us in the science basement who are interested in researchers in other fields interested in doing science communication, that it needs to be based on evidence, and that the skills that we apply in our other fields of research can easily be applied in science communication research. Of course, then there are issues in the science-based research, which is number 2 on the list here, evidence-based research, that there's a lot of not very good science communication research out there. And until the sort of methodological things are improved, they noted one part is actually like people who are researchers in, for example, physics or biology end up going into science communication. And while they know the methodological sort of uses the methodologies in their own field, it's very, very different in social sciences. And because they don't know social sciences methodology, they end up doing research that's not very replicable or very good. So but that being said, hopefully that will get a bit better, but we still need to base the works that we're doing in science communication on some actual evidence, which is why we're having this journal club. So welcome. Yeah, the number 3 here is another one that I'd like to highlight, talking about assessing impact. And this is a particularly hard one, but I think is something that is really important. Is that it's really necessary to not just do science communication, but also like find out what the impact is and what you're actually, if you're changing any minds or informing people in the way that you're intending to with a piece of science communication that you're doing. And then that's really key. The number 5 I wanted to highlight also that I think is really important is this mutual appreciation and collaboration. I think like it only became clear to me very recently that this...
Leah, we're losing you.
Okay, thanks. I'll just repeat.
Maybe you can, yeah, you repeat a little bit. We lost you for a moment.
Okay, yes, yeah. I was just saying for this mutual appreciation and collaboration, I think it's really key to have this awareness that we need to actually, talk with researchers in science communication. And I am super happy if anybody has any contacts that are doing research in this area to discuss and collaborate further, because that's something that I think would be really handy. Again, number 8 is also sort of maybe repeating a little bit about collaboration. And number 9, revisiting the reason for why we're doing science communication. What is both for the theorists who may be more on the theoretical side and don't see the effects and therefore don't like structure their research in a way that it's clear what the effects and applications of their research is, but also for us, why are we doing this, which goes into paper number 2, which we'll discuss in a little while. And number 10 is about systematic reviews. So if there are any people in the medical research area in this field, it'll be pretty clear what this is. Because of evidence-based medicine movement, there's this idea of having systematic reviews. You can find out more about systematic reviews in our series of podcast episodes in collaboration with the Cochrane organization if you need to find out more. A little plug there for the podcast team. But in general, it's a way of like systematically reviewing the evidence and coming up with a conclusion based on the existing literature studies of the answer to a question. Like, for example, what is in medicine, it would be something like, what is the use of a particular medical procedure? Is it useful for a certain thing? So in science communication research, it could be, what is the effectiveness of courses in science communication in improving these kinds of things, or certain types of courses, for example. And as far as I'm aware, doesn't really exist so much yet in science communication research, but since I'm definitely not an expert in that area, be happy to dig into it more. Yes, so this was the short overview of the first paper, just talking a bit about what is evidence-based science communication and the author's 12 lists, a couple that I've highlighted about the components of evidence-based science communication. So the second paper that we have was a note about an empirical and conceptual note on science communication's role in society from Sarah Davies at the University of Vienna. And this was an article that was a bit more of a philosophical lent to it, but was in general a very nice overview of the field of science communication and what science communication researchers think about what's important, why science communication is important for society. So the data for this article is based on a qualitative interview study carried out as part of this European Commission-funded project QUEST, Quality and Effectiveness in Science and Technology Communication, which might be something interesting to dig into. It was, in general, this project, if you're interested in this area, but this was one of the outputs of it. And it involved these semi-structured interviews with SciComm scholars in Europe. And the author noted that the findings are not final, but are rather an invitation to discussion, sort of getting all of these different viewpoints of why science communication is important and putting it into one place in one discussion, and then trying to sort of synthesize them. And in addition to that, she also did a literature review and included some things that one point that actually didn't come up in the interviews, but came sort of added separately from reading the literature about science communication in science communication, why the authors thought it was important. Yes, so there was I wanted to read this quote from the beginning that I thought was really great and made me be like, yeah, it's good we're doing this. Because the author said that an integral part of becoming adept in science communication is the ability to reflect on its role in society. While there's multiple potential roles that science communication may play in society, reflection on these is key to successful practice. So I feel like that's a little pat on the back for us for reading this article, because there's a pat on the back for the reader from the author, because it's saying well, good on you for reading about why science communication is important in society, and let me tell you what everybody else thinks. So it's, I think, quite useful. A big part of science communication is to understand why we're doing this in the first place, so that we can better focus the targets of our science communication and understand what sort of change or difference we wish to accomplish with the products of the science communication. And that comes from understanding what the value is to society. So yeah, so the author, through these structured interviews and review of the literature, came up with 6 roles of science communication in society. And I'll go through sort of each of them one by one. Some of them might be probably pretty familiar to most people, and some of them are things that I had never really thought of before, or was written in ways that I wouldn't have sort of written them, but thought about it in different words, not coming from the field. So these 6 ones are, first of all, to ensure accountability and legitimacy of the publicly funded science, practical applications or the usefulness of scientific knowledge by people consuming science communication media, to enhance democracy, and I'll get a bit more into about what that actually means, to serve a cultural role, what role science actually serves in not just as a practical thing, but actually as a part of our culture. Fulfilling economic purposes, so the needs of these advanced technological societies to have workers particularly, who are fluent in scientific knowledge, and acting as promotion or marketing for companies or universities. So dig into that from there. The first one is accountability. So this might be quite familiar, this quote, to most people. I think when we talk about science communication, this is the first thing that can come to mind, is that science communication's role in society relates to it being a duty or responsibility for those funded by public resources, and a necessity if they are to achieve public trust. So this brings a direct link between public funding and communication. If the taxpayers are paying our salaries, they deserve to know what their money is paying for. Either in those words as a moral obligation, or thinking about it more strategically, people are not going to pay taxes to fund our research if they don't know what it's for. So some people thought of it as a strategic a necessity, and others think of it as sort of a moral obligation to be able to tell this back. So that's the first thing, is that to make science and scientists accountable for particularly the funding of their research from taxes. And feel free, I think as we go through these, we can have the discussion questions at the end, but if you have any questions or comments, then feel free to interrupt me partway through. The second one that was identified was what they call pragmatic roles, which is maybe a bit of jargon in my mind, and I thought of it more as the usefulness of scientific information. And this gives the idea that science communication roles relates to the fact that it's useful to societal actors, giving people the knowledge to navigate in our contemporary technological societies. And one example for this for lay people, for example, is the issues of climate change and vaccination. Having greater scientific knowledge and literacy through science communication means that people can make more informed and better decisions for themselves most of the time. Human psychology notwithstanding. And particularly, this is also important for politics and politicians. So science is valuable knowledge for practical use in decision making. Either for individual persons or politicians. But it's also useful for scientists. science communication can be useful because scientists can learn from citizens what the most important societal problems are. I think did I break up a little there? Okay, now I'm back. Okay, great. Yes, I can see you've got your videos on, so I can see when they start to break, and then I'll be like, oh, okay, repeat myself there. Yeah, so it's useful also for scientists, because scientists, by communicating with the public, learn what the societal problems are that their research should be focusing on, through this dialogue with citizens, or even accessing knowledge that they wouldn't be able to access otherwise. For example, through citizen science, where you have people actually help you collect data and information for your projects. So this is sort of a two-way street of this usefulness of science communication and scientific knowledge, both for the people listening to this information and for the scientists themselves. Yeah. So the third one is about enhancing democracy, was this role. And I'll dig into a little bit about what that means, because this was a little like, as someone who's not a social scientist, really like threw me a little bit. What do you mean enhancing democracy? So SciComm, in this sense, mediates science's role in society because it enables discussion on the values and priorities of research, values and priorities, and how they should shape scientific research. So there's a quote from here from one of the interviewees saying, science can go into realms or to questions or procedures or kinds of experiments where it needs, let's say, societal guidance or steering, or at least they need to take into account the concerns that exist in society. So in this sense, it enhances democracy because it allows not just the people in the ivory tower to be sort of dictating what should be researched, or in some cases, what should not be researched. If you think about, human research on human embryos or cloning and things like that, these more controversial topics, it democratizes the science communication by letting people understand what is happening in science, allows the rest of society to come up with, to have a say in what should or should not be researched, or how it should be researched, or the ethics of these kinds of things. One example of this is having, for people that work in human or animal research, oftentimes the institutional review boards have citizen members. So people who are not associated with the university, people who are not involved in research at all, but are just members of the community that have a seat on these research boards to be able to comment on the ethics of the research that's being done when it comes up for review, if someone is applying to start a new research program. So that could be one. So it's enhancing democracy in the sense that it's taking the science communication by allowing people to understand what's happening in science, to democratize these decisions about ethics and where the directions of research are. Great. I think I have some more quotes from this one. Yeah. So the idea for this one is that how this differs from what we were discussing before about the practical usefulness of science information, of the knowledge of science, is it isn't just a practical value for the citizens, but a normative role. And I think that the word normative is maybe a little bit more jargon from this area. The quote here is that such accounts are suggestive of what contemporary democratic societies should look like and what science's place in them should be. There should be deliberative discussion about the processes of knowledge production, and science should be guided by societal values. As I mentioned before, it allows them to become a critical check on science. But this actually bolsters democracy through equipping and empowering citizens. I forgot I had a second slide here. I guess I discussed some of this part already, but yes. So the fourth one talks about not the practical use of science and the information of science that science communication gives to non-scientists and citizens, not the practical or normative role, practical being like practical good information that they can use to improve their decisions, the normative being what should science be like, but as a cultural role. When people discuss science, they're discussing who they are, the world they want to belong to, and what they want to believe. Science communication is thus both something cultural, similar to art, and a cultural process through which meanings and identities are made. So this is a sort of third value of science communication and science for citizens, because it's not just useful, the jargon there being instrumental, like or normative or even moral, but includes like aesthetics and pleasure. And I think we can see a lot of that in like the nerd culture that's become quite popular with shows like Big Bang Theory and stuff like that. Like it's not just about the usefulness of the information, but like how we see ourselves as a culture, like the actual aesthetic pleasure of science and something like that. So that's an additional and separate from the previous two uses. Okay, number 5, this one's a bit more straightforward. It's the economic purposes. So the value of science communication under the idea of economic purposes comes from the need to recruit people into science with technologically driven economies, the need for a workforce interested in and familiar with science, and the usefulness of science communication in informing and preparing a market base for technoscientific innovations. So this is for both, in an economic sense, workers who are familiar with and interested in science, and for consumers in sort of this, market society that the people who are interested in buying these new scientific innovations are more likely to do so, and it's good for the economy if they are knowledgeable about science and ready to buy these kinds of techno-scientific newfangled stuff. Yes. So promotional purposes. So interestingly, this is something that was actually talked about quite negatively by the people who are being interviewed. So they talked about institutional marketing or promotion or branding as a problem rather than a reason that SciComm is valuable to society, because this marketing by the institutions or, for example, companies, scientific companies themselves, ignores the critical. It's usually very uncritical sort of promotion and maybe even quote unquote propaganda. And it's important to have this sort of critical and reflective dimensions in good quality science communication. So the interviewees for this were like, well, this is a problem, actually. It's not a reason that it's valuable to society. One quote being here, like, the extension and professionalism of organizational PR for some science, like university PR, comes at a time when science journalism, for example, is eroding and getting weaker. And they sort of like grumble, grumble kind of thing. That being said, there's a counter argument to that, right? Like if you're a university, you would say that this self-promotion is necessary to recruit students and fulfill their societal functions as a university. And for industries and companies, they have to argue that marketing is necessary if they want to make this economic contribution to society. So I think since most of us are in the university, it's easier to let's say, empathize with the first university's counter argument, maybe a little bit less with the companies, depending on how you feel about that. But it is fair that this self-promotion is also quite necessary for the university to get new students and do science. So yes, so those were the 6 of them. An overall synthesis, this is my last slide, and then we can start with the discussion and questions and things like that. But of these 6 ones here, the author was able to sort of pull together and find 2 main themes with these 6 identified roles and of the value of science communication to society. And well, the first thing that she noted is that like one piece of science communication isn't going to necessarily follow neatly into one of these 6 categories. It is often multiple categories that it falls into. And we shouldn't try and sort of parse them out, but it's good to think about it, because then we can think about and discuss what is the purpose of the science communication that we're doing, which of these roles. Okay. Now I'm back. Okay. Yes, okay. Like which of these roles can this piece of science communication that we're doing, can they fulfill? And to think about that, well, to think about it in the first place, because oftentimes we don't think about what the point of the science communication that we're doing, because we're just so excited about talking about our work. And sort of taking these 6 roles and putting them into 2 kind of themes. And the first theme that she identified over these 6 ones was that science communication is important for democracy and for governing science in democratic societies. In this sense, it not just the one identified that it specifically bolsters democracy, but like in the accountability argument, for example, if we say the reason that we do science communication is because we need to be accountable to taxpayers, this assumes the fact that the public has a right to ask us about the use of their taxes, which in a non-democratic society, that wouldn't be an assumption. So even this accountability argument, sort of underlying that is this assumption that, if you pay taxes, you have a right to say how your taxes are used. Yeah, and it also is in the criticism of the university marketing as well, this bolstering democracy, because it offers this counter model where science communication should be critical of itself. So that's sort of underlying that one as well. And the second one is that in addition to having science communication be important for democracy and for governing science, that sharing knowledge through science communication is sort of the ethically correct thing to do, either for practical reasons, because people can make better decisions in their lives with the information from science, for economic reasons, because the economy needs people like consumers and workers that are fluent in science, or for aesthetic reasons, for cultural reasons. This kind of scientific information should be shared with all members of society and not sequester this valuable knowledge shouldn't be sequestered in certain parts of society and in the academy, but should be shared with everyone.